join me in the response in your bulletin. Because Jesus sent no one away,
we too will send no one away.
In Matthew chapter 15, we are told about a time when Jesus was challenged to change his own perceptions of others by an encounter with a Gentile woman. It reads, "Once a Canaanite woman, a foreigner and an enemy, came to him. 'Son of David,' she cried, 'have mercy on me. My daughter has a demon and is in a terrible condition.' But Jesus did not say a word to her. His disciples came to him and begged him, 'Send her away. She is following us and making all this noise.' Then Jesus replied to her, 'I have been sent only to the lost sheep of the people of Israel.' At this, the woman came and fell at his feet. 'Help me,' she said. Jesus answered, 'It isn't right to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs.' 'That may be true, sir,' she answered. 'But even the dogs eat the leftovers that fall from their master's table.' So Jesus answered her, 'You are a woman of great faith. What you want will be done for you.' And at that very moment, her daughter was healed." Please help me out with response, please. Because Jesus sent no one away,
we too will send no one away.
Back in 2004, almost 15 years ago now, members of Church of the Savior approved a congregational statement in support of marriage equality. And as part of that statement, it said, "We believe, as all Christians do, that the Scriptures are our chief authority. However, we also believe that on questions of who is acceptable in God's eyes, we look particularly to the gospel, to the good news revealed to us in the life and teachings of Jesus. The God of the gospel is a God of unconditional, all-embracing love. Unconditional love is by definition radically inclusive. It does not exclude others because of race, culture, gender identity, sexual orientation, social standing, or other differences. Based on this understanding of the gospel, Church of the Savior has declared itself to be an open and affirming church. Because Jesus sent no one away, we too will send no one away." Sisters and brothers, biblical stories speak to us in many different ways, from many different angles. And today's story about Abraham and Sarah, Hagar and Ishmael, is strange to us and disturbing as well. Yet even here we find insight into the Bible, into our lives, and into the nature of God. I think the first thing to notice in this passage is just how much it reflects the social values and practices of the time in which it was written down. Values that are no longer accepted today. Slavery, for example, is taken for granted in this passage. So are things like the absolute power of men over women and the practice of casting people out of a family or clan or society for no justifiable reason. None of these things are acceptable to us today, yet in this story, even God seems to take them for granted. Is that a reflection of God or of the time in which it was written? I think all of us would agree it reflects the time in which it was written, not what we understand about God today. What about marriage in this passage? Those who oppose marriage equality often point to the Bible as the source of their insistence on the model, one man, one woman. Apparently they overlook Abraham and on the other ancient founders of our faith, which are at the very center of the biblical story, all of whom had harems made up of multiple wives, concubines, and slaves. As biblical scholar Walter Wink once wrote, the crux of the matter is simply that the Bible has no overarching sexual ethic. There is no biblical sex ethic. Instead, it exhibits a variety of social mores, some of which changed over the 1,000-year span of biblical history. Mores, he says, are unreflective customs accepted by a given culture or community. Many of the practices that the Bible prohibits, we allow, and many that it allows, we prohibit. The Bible has no overarching sexual ethic. The Bible, he says, only knows a love ethic. which is constantly being brought to bear on whatever sexual customs are dominant in any given culture or period. So the point is that you can't take the Bible literally on issues like this. For example, the Bible has no knowledge of sexual orientation as we understand it today. Our favorite brochure that we hand out at Pride Fest is the one that has a very classic picture of Jesus on the front, and it says what Jesus actually said about sexual orientation. And people are very intrigued, and they open it up and it's empty. And then on the back we explain what we believe about that. But Jesus, there was no such concept as we understand it today in the biblical world, and Jesus didn't talk about it anyway. Even when the Bible condemns sexual acts, it's in the context of raw lust and coercive situations involving rape, prostitution, or ancient temple practices. Ultimately, what the Bible gives us is not a sex ethic, but a love ethic, which should be used to guide all our behavior toward one another. That love ethic is why we no longer accept slavery or casting people out or devaluing the rights of women. The sad thing for me is that such literalistic interpretations not only are abusive to people, they're used in abusive ways toward people, but they miss the deeper meaning the Bible has to offer. For example, if you take a step back from today's story about Hagar and Ishmael, what do you see? You see a story about an unwanted child. You see parents whose expectations of their family and their children lead them to favor one over the other and to cruelly and utterly reject one of their own children because he doesn't meet their standards, their expectations. You see the story of a dysfunctional biblical family. By the way, most of the families in the Bible are dysfunctional. That may give some of us hope, you know. You see a dysfunctional biblical family that reflects patterns of human behavior still alive in families today, not to mention in society, even in the church at large. Whether it's because of sexual orientation or gender identity, physical appearance or cultural background, or even whether you have appropriate immigration documents, our families, our church, and our society still often cruelly reject one of our own children simply because he or she doesn't live up to our standards, our expectations of full humanity. The good news in this story, even this ancient, kind of strange story from Genesis, the good news in this story, transcending culture, time, and place, is that there is one figure in the story who sees the unwanted child, one who hears his cries, who calls to the child's mother and to all of us from this story to lift him up